Okay, you're on.
It is Senate Transportation, and we're resuming our testimony. And we have the Director of the Watershed Management Division for DEC on, and we're going to we've got about 10 minutes. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Chair Westman. Thank you very much for having me in this morning, and I apologize for not being able to be there in person. I'm traveling right now, so not in Vermont, but welcome the opportunity to talk to the committee this morning.
So here's where we are. The version of the chloride bill that is in natural resources has had salt sheds in the bill, out of the bill, some piece of it in the bill, and the concern in our committee is for small and medium-sized communities that have salt sheds that are uncovered. And we want to make sure that they are highlighted as a priority going forward for funding. And so we're trying to just focus around that issue. How do we make sure that we let people know that from the legislative point of view, salt sheds are a priority?
We agree with that, Senator Westman. And we testified in Senate Natural Resources. There were sort of two levels of salt sheds that were discussed there, and I also agree with the potential costs for smaller communities. Our testimony was in 100 yards was chosen by the bill drafters as a reasonable distance from waters where the largest concern of storing either salt or salted sand close to a water body would be the purpose of the bill is to optimize the amount of salt put on surfaces to balance between obviously maintaining safe surfaces, roads and parking lots and sidewalks, but not putting it on to excess. That's as you know, the main thrust of the proposed bill. Those salt sheds that are located on the banks of a river, say, or within 100 yards, that was the chosen distance. Those are the ones of largest concern, and we recommended because the option there would be for a community or an applicator to move that over time. Over the next 5 years, I believe, was the time given in the bill to either cover or move that. But we also had concerns over the cost of covering and wanted to be able to better evaluate those costs, and then also potential funding mechanisms to assist communities that were unable for whatever reason to move the salt piles, but to then assist them in covering. We have some data from communities. We looked at 122 salt piles and their relationship to surface waters in the Lake Champlain Basin, so on the western half of the state, essentially. And we have found that of those 122 communities, altogether, there are 170 so-called piles. 119 of those already are on an improved pad, and only 20 of them are within 100 yards of surface waters. Now, that data hasn't been field verified, but that data is based on remote sensing analysis of different communities. So the extent of the problem, I don't think is enormous in terms of the number of situations that would require correction. And then again, if we focus primarily on the ones within 100 yards, the option over the next 5 years would be to gradually move those away. To store that salt in a different location or to cover it, but certainly wanting to evaluate the costs of that and potential funding sources.
So if we were going to just doing that. Here's part of our issue, and I'll do my own personal. The community of Elmore just built, a covered salt shed it was within 100 yards of Lake Elmore.
Mhm.
It took them more than a dozen years to save up the money to do something about this. Quite strapped and I know a few other communities that are smaller communities like that are in that problem. We want to be able to say to communities when we go out to those communities that policy wise, we recognize the issues, the costs for small communities, and that there is a pathway to help them. So we want to be proactive in just saying that.
I agree with that, Chair Westman.
And should we, in what we draft, should we focus on salt sheds that are within 100 yards? Or should we be more general and have you come back to us with some recommendations in a year or two?
I think the latter would be the best course. I think we need to do a little bit more work in terms of evaluating both the true extent of how many of these there are, and then also the costs for covering. And as you know, there are two different areas of salt. There's salt mixed with sand, which is a lesser amount of salt, and then there's the pure salt storage. And certainly covering those pure salt facilities makes a lot of sense, not only for the environment, but also the cost of salt. And, those piles sitting out exposed to rainfall and snow melt. And I mean, they're losing salt as well. And, in the instances where they're close to waters, they're losing salt, and they're also, causing contributions of chlorides to waters. But I think a report, evaluating the extent, the extent of the problem and the cost associated with it and potential funding sources is a good idea. We just don't have that information at hand right now. We could develop it, but we don't have it at this moment.
Well, are there committees questions? Senator White has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Mr. LaFlamme. It's nice to see you.
Hello, Senator White. It's nice seeing you again.
I know, usually you're in the other room. Thank you for your time on this. So is your recommendation then that we not move an amendment on the initial bill to create a program? Is that the underlying?
No, I think we're talking about the conversation that we had earlier today about putting an amendment, prioritizing municipal salt sheds. I think what we've heard is don't make it specific to within 100 yards and have them come back with a report to us about the extent of the problem and recommendations around funding.
And that's what we would do within our amendment.
That's what we would do within the amendment around from the members of this committee on the bill.
Okay, thank you. That is, if that's what you're saying, that is really helpful, because I would prefer not to move an amendment that would go against the work that you're doing. So is that a fair?
That's perfectly fair, Senator White. Thank you. We support the underlying basis of the bill. We strongly supported the opportunity for the training and the optimization of, putting enough salt on to maintain safe surfaces, but not putting excess on, which we've all seen on sidewalks and parking lots, typically the commercial applicators. And it's we recognize that in a lot of cases they're doing that to guard against liability, either slip and fall liability, which the owners of the properties in some cases want that, or the applicators themselves. So I think the training to optimize the application to maintain those surfaces but not put too much on in consideration of the limited liability provisions, we support that bill, and we support those elements of it. It's, as Chair Westman was just describing, we could, one part of the bill, as you know, is about the storage of salt. And that's an incidental problem in all of this as well. But certainly the the heart of the bill we support.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You've been very helpful.
Thank you, Chair Westman. It's great to see you all, and thanks for inviting me in.
Thank you. Michael, would you?
Assuming it's at conference or something. Peter.
Don't close this out and step out.
Yeah, it's like a hotel. Oh, thank you.
Which would you like me to start with?
No.
If you could start with the salt one, that we get that done.
This year is 2.3 before this. Yeah. No, I have 2.2 and 2.3.
So,
Oh, you got the Harrison amendment, okay. Yeah, I have the Harrison. You made copies too.
yeah, I just,
Oh,
my computer was not working well. This is,
Oh, so this is the,
that's
committee
29, yeah. That's right,
Oh.
this is the proposed. Senator Weston, do you have a copy?
Yeah.
You all?
Thank you.
This is 2.3. Two different things.
I got it.
Different things.
Yeah, I got this
So-
one, you got this one.
Okay.
And you know what, I'll look
I
at
have
it.
That's
I don't know.
Right, this is Senator Westman asked me to start with S29. And what this would do is it would, in the Clean Water Fund priority on page 2, line 15, require the board to recommend as part of their annual recommendation for the governor and the general assembly, funding for grants to municipalities for compliance with the requirements in section 1354 to cover the storage of salt and sand mixtures and sand, providing that funding shall be at least $1 million. So whatever you want to set that amount at is.
I want to, I'm not sure I want to set a number yet. I am more interested in making sure it's a priority and that we get the report back from the agency, because they haven't done all the work to know exactly how many there is out there. And I'd be looking for a number from them
Right.
to do this. But I want to be able to walk out in my communities and say, we recognize it, we directed them to make this a priority in this. I personally am not real clear about how I would set a number at this point.
Right.
So I want the number that got set in this based on something from people that are doing. But I want small communities particularly to have a comfort level that we're aware of their problems as we move in the direction of more and more mandates to do this.
So I totally understand what you just said, and it makes sense if there's a cover requirement. But from listening to Pete, they're not ready for a cover requirement.
Yeah. But they're
And
moving in that direction. And the problem is, it's a chicken and the egg problem.
yes,
If I don't know the scope of the problem to be able to direct in that, they're going to mandate it. And I'm going to say, well, how much money do you need? And they haven't collected the information, so I know how much money is needed. So we need to be out in front of this saying, this is a priority, give us the number. So in the direction we're headed towards mandating this eventually. And so it's kind of, when we get to that point, I want to make sure that we know that we're clear about how much we need.
sure. So should I recommend to the committee across the hall that if they have a cover requirement, they also have a report back from the agency with an estimate of how many.
We can do that amendment here.
Yes, you could, but
And quite frankly, we've been trying to follow the bill.
mhm,
And I think what it says, if we do it an amendment, and they support the amendment, that this committee has done its due diligence and looked at that, and no one will say, well, you guys didn't look at the bill.
Right, understood.
And I want people to know that we're in support of the bill as the Committee on Transportation, that we looked at the bill. And this was our particular concern, and we policy-wise have made a statement about salt and sand sheds being covered.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess now I'm a bit unsure about our process because I do support the funding of grant. And I like actually that we have a fixed number there because I think it gives the appropriations committee, who I've heard multiple times in this committee are the end all be all for these conversations. It gives them a number to think about. So I actually appreciate the amendment as it's written because I think it makes the point you're saying. And I guess I'm confused because it seems like if we're going to move an amendment on the hypothetical possibility of something being included in a bill, then maybe that's just a speech by the chair of our committee rather than an amendment to the bill. You know, saying like standing up on the floor and saying, to your point, we reviewed it and don't have any recommendations, but if in the future, like you could give a speech to that effect rather than an amendment. But I actually think this is great.
And I would
want us to do this.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for letting me finish. I really appreciate it.
Also, we need to direct them to come back with a report about what's the scope of the problem. And with some estimates.
I think that's in the original bill. I think they do have a report back to Senate Natural Resources. In the original has 29. Maybe I'm behind a graph.
Not for identifying the scope of the problem or how much it would cost to cover salt sheds.
Oh, but they're not requiring salt sheds, so.
They are.
Oh, I thought you just said they're not requiring covering. Yeah.
A&R doesn't want to require cover. S29 has gone back and forth, and currently it does have cover in it.
Oh. Now, okay, I apologize. I thought the last time we saw it was out. Okay.
So I think we need to say in an amendment from the 5 members of this committee that we need an estimate back of, we need someone, what's the scope of the problem? And what's the cost that we should be looking at? And I think we as this committee want to say that in this, and we want to direct them. I'm a little uncomfortable. I'm still a little uncomfortable. Well, I'll put a number in if people in this committee would like a number. I personally am in this year, the first year of this, not as comfortable putting in a number without that report back about what the overall cost is. But I want to say, I want to clearly in this policy-wise say, salt and sand sheds for municipalities should be a priority that they work with. And then come back and make a recommendation to us about the cost and what the overall scope of the problem is. And I personally would like it done by the members of this committee.
So that's not this amendment. Then.
Well, I think
It's more than this.
it's more than this amendment.
So,
Go ahead.
I am comfortable with this amendment and I like that it, clearly identifies our intent that this mandate will not be an unfunded mandate. It will be a funded
That's
mandate.
exactly.
I think
what-
that's really important and especially this early in the conversation. And I would think that the amount would be discussed by the appropriations committee when it gets there. And I would hope that this is a fund that would roll over to following years if it wasn't all used in one year.
That gets addressed in budget adjustment when you don't, if growth of monies of the Clean Water Fund that don't get used, they go back to budget adjustment.
Because,
I'm fine with the
Yeah.
million and I'm fine with the language.
okay,
I would, if that's the will of the
Yeah.
committee, I'm fine with it. I would like them to report back to us with, the scope of the problem and their recommendation for numbers going forward.
Okay,
So wait, can I make a request?
Go ahead.
Can we, and you can disagree with me, you're in charge. Can we move this motion to us, to have an amendment that we all sign off on? Because I agree with this, I like this. And then to what we heard, Council Brady say earlier, could he note to natural resources that we would like a report back and ideally to include said transportation?
I think we'll put it, I will want to put it right in this amendment.
Okay.
okay, so they're calling for me across the
Yeah,
hall.
go across the hall and you can report what, to
Right.
them, what we're looking at.
And you have Senator Harrison's proposed amendment for 46, and this is your other amendment for 46. And just let me know if you want any changes to that.
I think 146, we're waiting for cost estimates for it, too. We now will have Senator Harris's, amendment and,
Okay,
and when Logan gets his cost estimates back, we'll take 46 up again.
Oh,
okay.
I misunderstood the process. Okay.
Well,
So we're not.
I thought we might have an estimate from Logan about that. But I'm.
that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I don't like.
Okay,
My numbers.
yeah,
All right, do you want,
Wait, can I just get like a
sure.
flight controller? What are we doing?
I was about to ask the same question, Senator.
Okay. So can I get that? So we're not voting on do you expect that we will vote on the amendment today for S-46? Do you expect that we'll vote?
I'm hoping that we vote on the amendment, that Michael can get the amendment back. S-46, we're going to have to wait and see what Logan comes back with for numbers before I want the committee to vote on that.
Okay, and do you have will that be today if we have folks who are in the building who are kind of waiting
Logan's
for
last
reaction to this?
text to me, if you want me, let's see. His last text was working on them now. We'll send you them ASAP.
Oh, great. So we
So-
will be able to.
I'm hopeful.
Thank you for that. Like,
Oh.
controller moment.
All right.
Okay. Do you want to start with noise or miscellaneous motor vehicle? I think noise is on the agenda first.
We're going to have to take with the noise bill and go through it section by section, because there are a number of sections here. And there's going to be disagreement over individual sections and changes that are going to be made. We have ACLU is scheduled at 10. I think I'd like to have them testify first before we, and that will be the last group that has submitted a request to testify. And then we'll begin to go through that. And the intention is that will be to go through this issue by issue in the noise bill. And we will either adjust a section or vote it out to come up with a final draft of the noise bill. So that being the case, and we'd like to hear from the ACLU next. I think it would make more sense to go to miscellaneous DMV.
Okay,
Okay,
that's fine. So,
and we still will have the issue of coming up with cost estimates for people on SSI and what we do around that SSI population. Almost every bill that is in front of us now gives up revenue with the default. And I'm really, because when we get the T-bill and when we do a transportation bill, at that point, we will have to have a list of everything that we've spent, that we've given revenue away on, and we will have to balance. So I'm a little, just so we put that out on the table. Right, David? And with that, let's knock off a few of the issues on the DMV bill.
I'm not sure I can ease everyone's angst, but hopefully we can narrow the issues a bit this morning. All right, so we're going to start on section 5, which is on page 8. I have tried to update the bill, so it should be draft 6.1. At the request of the chair, I'm trying my best to make sure the highlighting is things that are still undecided.
Yep.
And so you'll see highlighting at the top of those sections. I did realize as I was looking at the bill just now that I missed a couple pieces, but I'll just tell you when we can skip over them.
Okay.
Going to page 9, the piece here is just the fee.
Yep.
And after yesterday's discussion, it really, I think what we've come down to is the committee needs to choose a fee.
Yep.
So we put a nominal fee of $5 in there, but I don't think we have a clear estimate of the actual cost per transaction. So it's just a question of what's a reasonable fee from the committee's perspective.
Yep. And that conversation, I think we'll need to have with Logan sitting in the chair, because some of this is going to come down to how much revenue we want to put in. There is going to be a cost to the bill we just talked about for foresters and their vehicles. There is a cost to the SSI population, and I will say to the table personally, and both worthy causes. I personally lean a little bit more lenient towards the SSI population because they're so low income. But we're going to have to struggle with how much revenue we think we can give up.
What's the current fee? $20?
The current fee
39.
for no, in that case, the fee is it's directly above it, which is 20. So that's 25% of the current fee.
Okay, 20.
Yep.
And then
going down to section 115 A being amended here. This is the non-driver identification card.
Yes.
And this is the first instance where we're making the changes for children in foster care. So at the very middle of page 10, lines 15 and 16 there, you'll see that we've added for the individuals who can get a non-driver ID at no charge, an individual under 18 years of age who is in the custody and care of the Commissioner for Children and Families. I was able to talk to Katie McGlynn this morning, and there will be a slight tweak to that language. She informed me that the way I've drafted it would capture children who are also within the criminal justice system. We wanted to find that if your aim is foster care, we wanted to find that as children who are in care and custody of the Commissioner pursuant to 33 VSA 49034. And then the other question she had is,
So you would direct it directly to the place in statute, so.
yeah, just reference exactly who it is. And then the other question she had is, what about children who are under kinship care, were they intended to be covered or not? And I don't know the answer to that. That may be something that's worth
Children that are what?
under kinship care.
Yep.
And so that's a different reference, which we could add very easily, but it's just to be exactly clear on who is getting the benefit and who is not getting the benefit.
Go ahead.
I think our point was that we wanted, DCF is like paying for it with a credit card right now. So that was the group of people who I was like, okay, we should probably not be affecting that. So are folks in kinship care, they're with a family member, correct? So they are not having DCF pay for it now?
I don't know.
Okay.
So yeah, this is well outside of my comfort zone, in terms of knowing anything about the programs.
I guess my value statement then would be if folks are in kinship care and DCF is paying for it, then yes, I do think that that's accurate.
Wendy.
I would just, I do, the kids who are in the incarcerated category, some of them may be in institutions and some of them may be in other places. I mean, there's so many different categories, subcategories. And I doubt that many of them are able to get a license, but if they are, I would support giving them a break on the charge. They don't have money and so that's where I would include them, but I don't know how many there are.
I don't either. But all I know is that she let me know that I may or may not have swept too broadly, since I told her the goal was to capture children in foster care. And so.
Okay.
At this time, I think I'd rather just keep it at the foster care. Should go better.
I would agree with that. We've got an estimate for the cost of this that's 15,000. I think it's a step ahead, and we have to move this bill. We have a number of bills that we want to consider, and we have to move by Friday. So my recommendation to the committee at this point is that we accept his direct reference to statute, and you put that in and we unhighlight this section and we move on, because I think we all want to take a step forward here. And if in future dates we want to add to that, I'm perfectly willing to look at this population and do it, but this is what we priced out and what we know.
I understand, and I agree with that, and I can find out more in the institutions, right?
Is that fine with
Okay.
everybody? Yeah, and I would welcome in the future going further than this, but we need to move on.
Totally understand.
Okay,
Okay.
David. So put your reference in unhighlight.
I've got a note in there to make that change. There is no change in sections 7 and 8. Those were some of the accidental highlights I didn't catch. In section 9, this is still open. This is the SSI, SSDI
Yep.
piece. The one thing I wanted to provide some context to the committee. So those are the same rates we charge for 4-year non-driver ID for individuals on SSI, SSDI. There is a difference though in the base rate that we charge for those two things. So a 4-year license or privilege card is $62. A 4-year non-driver ID is $29. So the question is whether you're going for proportionality or just the same rate, like a flat rate if you're on SSI, SSDI. And so it's really a policy question for you, but just in terms of comparing apples to apples with other statutes, we set the rate to match that, but the base rate for those two different IDs is different.
Okay.
No.
When Logan gets in the chair, we'll have to have that whole discussion.
Okay.
Okay.
On page 13, you'll see that for, again, this is the same language for children in foster care, and I'll make the updates to that and close it out.
Yep.
And I have included no additional fee for a motorcycle endorsement, assuming that a child in foster care seeks that. So
Okay.
can't
I
imagine.
can't
it would
imagine
work,
there are too many.
but you never know.
With a helmet.
Yeah, helmets mandatory. This committee has fought that issue more
I
than once.
bet, I know.
Seatbelts.
Yeah.
One more second.
All right.
Next.
The next section, bottom of page 13, top of page 14, same thing for learners permits.
Yep.
And then on page 14, same thing again. I'll make the updates to clarify the language. But we're saying learners permits for both motor vehicle and motorcycle, no charge, including renewals. Okay. And that brings us all the way down to page 21. And this gets into the question of operators, licenses, privilege cards, and non-driver identification card renewals that we were discussing yesterday.
Mhm.
The chair asked me to draft some language that would show how we would accomplish what the commissioner had proposed of providing extensions within the existing law.
Mhm.
And so that's in here.
Just to say to you from going forward, when we do this, I'm gonna ask that when we do drafts, that they show up on and in two separate forms so we can compare. So
Okay.
there's no confusion about what the draft looks like going forward from this time. But you know, and that's a little different than the form that you standard do, but that will save confusion around this table.
Sure. And I can provide everyone with the side by side.
Yeah.
Later today.
Yeah, that would be good that we had the side by side in this as we go through that. And I will, when we talk about the SSI piece, Logan will be we're gonna ask joint fiscal about the implications of doing this, because I think there is some implications in the flow of money. And we'll make a decision on that if we can get that side by side. Okay.
I have lots of thoughts, but.
So the basic gist of this language is that it would allow someone to get an early renewal of their operator's license or privilege card at a prorated rate. So if you say you got a 2-year license last time around, and that was a year ago, you have a year left, you could then opt into a 4-year license now with a year prorated off of it. And so the way I drafted it last night is that if 1 or more years remain, you would reduce the amount by rounding down to the next whole year. You may want to just say to the closest whole year. But but I wasn't sure which direction, because then you could have someone at 18 months into a 2-year license. And I don't know, it's a fee issue, not an early renewal issue. This would still provide that person, if they're concerned the law is going to change in the next 6 months, they could do an early renewal now. This could be coupled with, or mixed and matched with various provisions from the language we reviewed yesterday regarding outreach or extending certain types of IDs durations. So for example, if you wanted to take the privilege card and make that an 8-year ID, but keep the real IDs at 4, you can do any number of combinations with this. But that's basically what we've done here, is just allow for early renewal, which isn't explicitly spelled out in the statute. It's not explicitly prohibited. But the statute basically says 2 or 4 years, and then commissioner shall send a renewal form at least 30 days ahead of time before expiration. The only extension language in statute applies to members of the military while they're on active duty. And that's an up to 4-year extension after expiration. But I'm not sure that would address the concerns for someone who is looking for an ID that they can use, because while it might be okay with law enforcement, if you can produce the paperwork to say this ID is not expired, it probably wouldn't fly when you're trying to, use your ID to buy things that are age restricted or for other things that you need an ID. So that's why this was drafted as an early renewal, so that you have a valid ID.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So if the person had 1 year left, would that 1 year be added on to the 4 years?
No, so it'd basically be, right now the terms are 2 or 4 years. And that's one of the things that you could still tweak.
Do we need to do it in this language, or do we do it somewhere else?
You would do it in a different section. I added 2 new sections to basically authorize early renewal. So you could really take these sections and mix them into yesterday's language or a modified version of yesterday's language, or just pieces of it, depending on what direction you want to go in as a committee. But this is language that could stand alone or be mixed in with that. So it would work with the existing law. You can also update the existing law and add this to it.
So my understanding was that if there were years still, if the current license was valid for more than a year, that those future years could be added on to the new license. That's what I heard the commissioner say. So I that makes sense to me to do it that way.
Yeah, that wasn't what I understood, but so that but I may have just misunderstood.
Well, he just said it one time. There were many instances of conversation that didn't include that, but at one point he said if you have 2 years, then you get a 4-year license, you can have 6 years.
I think yeah. So I think what I would say is that if that's what you want, we need to change the law, because right now the law says 2 or 4 years.
Yeah, my
And it doesn't
understanding,
explicitly provide for 6.
right, my understanding was that because of the way the computer system is set up, they can only do 2 or 4.
Right.
But I guess they
Right.
can't do
But
6, but it could do 4 from
When the new system is up, they can
Right.
program that. Although right now it's being programmed for 2 or 4, so they would have to put in a change order to the programming, but Yeah.
And I'll just say to the committee as a whole, we're at Wednesday. We've got to have this done by Thursday. I want to be respectful to the people that are concerned about the issue on that. And we do 2 and 4 year licenses. There are whole issues if we go beyond 4 years. The flow of dollars and the flow of funds into the T fund and how that would all work. And I think Logan will talk about this. This is trying to find a middle ground that would be respectful to that and move ahead on this. It's the first step we would take in the process. The House might come up with something different. But trying to be respectful and find a middle ground.
Just
Go ahead.
to reiterate, I heard him say 6 years. And that the 6 years would not be a problem. That's what I heard. So maybe we just clarify that with the commissioner. And if it's,
And that's
if
fine.
it's-
And the change is definitely doable.
Okay.
The real issue is that, we need to be explicit because right now, the way the law is written, I'm not sure there's explicit authority for that.
okay.
And I am always reluctant to say, just do it,
Oh, and I'm not suggesting that.
or great, because when you start to get into that gray area, you start opening up a whole host of issues about, is it following legislative intent? What was legislative intent?
And I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah, so that's, on my review last night, I saw that they do have existing programs where they give extensions, but it is limited to military, and the way it works would potentially be problematic for someone who wasn't also carrying a military ID. Because that's the thing, when you're on active duty military, you have your military ID, and you're likely doing a lot of your shopping on base and things like that. So it's different than an average citizen
Yeah, that's
who needs their driver's license for all sorts of transactions.
Maybe what the commissioner's talking about is that you could like early, so if you still had a year on your license, you could today get the 4-year extension.
Yeah,
Instead of waiting for it. So that's for 2 years. So that's kind of like 6 years. You're like preemptively getting a 4-year addition to your 2-year.
Yeah, that's
And-
not
and
the
if-
way I heard it, but.
So maybe that's.
yeah. And that, depending
That would be
on,
allowed.
yeah, and if we can get clarity from the commissioner on
I-
what the commissioner envisions, I can-
I've been, and the commissioner but I'm sitting here and I can't answer the phone for him, and he's called glass. So we're
So
gonna,
he has something to say.
we'll circle back
Great,
around.
thank you.
But you've got an idea of the issue. Did you have anything else?
No, it's just.
Okay, let's move on
great.
and
So,
Wait,
go ahead.
so I respect that you've chosen to put in this language separate from the conversation we had yesterday. It sounds like you worked separately with Damien to draft this, and I appreciate that. However, I think in the future, it would be nice to get a little bit more of a heads up. Because I appreciate what you said, where you said, we have a short amount of time to work on this. I did send an email with my original language 3 weeks ago. This was flagged it that long ago. And there are groups of people who are very impacted by our decisions, who have not had informed time to review this language, while also having a very tight deadline. So I do just want to point out that if I was someone who was in this situation, I would feel pressured to make a compromise when I don't necessarily think that that's appropriate. So I want to put that out there, and I hope in the future that we can deal with these issues proactively, so that when we have specific groups of people who are impacted by our decisions, they have a longer window of time to respond and reflect on it. Because I want to compromise on these issues, but I don't necessarily know if this answers all of the concerns that I heard from constituents who are actively unable to renew their passport right now because of their gender identity. So I have many questions about the language. It sounds like you want to move us along, so I'm going to talk to Damien separately, is what I understand. And it also sounds like we've had a conversation with JFO about the cost of it. You kind of framed up for us that this will cost a lot of money or have implications for our T fund. And I just want us to hold our opinions on that until we hear from JFO, because I don't necessarily know if that's an accurate reflection of the reality of the situation.
I think we're gonna come back to this.
Yeah.
I think what I made a suggestion for before is, we're gonna change our drafting practices going forward. I think I suggested to Damien, we to do a side by side, and we would make a decision. This is a proposal that is meant to try to be accommodating. and go back with that. We have to, by Friday, we have a number of issues here that we have to go through. So I wanted to put this on the table. We'll come back and we'll look at both proposals in that piece and moving forward. All right.
And yeah, I will make sure everything gets into a side by side.
Yep.
In the future.
And if you could bring this back to us in a side by side.
You'll get that as soon as I have a break in testimony this morning.
Thank you.
It'll take me about 5 minutes.
Yep.
So, yeah. So section 18, which is on page 23, was the other piece to that, and it's an intent statement saying that it's the intent of the General Assembly that the commissioner would ensure that any individual who's unable to or does not wish to comply with the requirements of the Real ID Act shall be informed of the option of obtaining an operator's privilege card or a non-driver identification card. And those are options we provide under current law. And so this is just kind of reiterating our intent that if someone comes in and they're told you need to provide this document or you need to answer this question in a certain way to comply with the Real ID Act, the person says, I'm not comfortable doing that, they can be told, well, we can also give you a state privilege card, which does everything except give you the US Customs ID for going across the border.
Some military things, or
Yes,
some federal buildings.
right. But unfortunately, we can't control the federal law, but it does give them the right to get a state ID and not feel like they got turned away. So, I'm not advocating.
Yeah.
I'm just saying if we get stuck in a position where the Real ID Act changes in a way that restricts what the state can issue, this would affirmatively say it's the intent. You could also say, you could also just take out it is the intent of the General Assembly and say the commissioner shall ensure. And that's even stronger language.
And you said they do this now, right?
I think so.
But they just ensure that.
So it'd be another statement in law. And in a lot of ways, this is language that's signaling where the legislature stands. So.
Can I ask why we took out, or why you chose to take out the front and house books? Why we don't have the report? Because I believe the commissioner was, if they maybe they
So
got
this was me drafting last night, misunderstanding the request to basically have the language side by side. So
it wasn't an intentional removal
Yeah.
of that.
To be fair to Damien, we were stuck between him getting here when appropriations was ending and the chair's meeting, and the fact that I asked if we could talk after the thing and he said, yeah, I have to feed my kids. And I said at that point, we'll talk tomorrow.
yeah,
Okay, so it wasn't an intentional removal of the unhoused provisions. So
We're gonna end up with all of this side by side.
yeah. So
Okay.
it'll be back in there for consideration.
It'll be they'll side by side and we will have a discussion about how we're gonna move forward.
because I thought the commissioner was actually in favor of those sections, so. This was my read. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and yeah, no, that is my fault. So it'll be in the side by side you get in a minute. And that'll be back in there. Yeah.
we need to keep moving.
Keep rolling. Okay. So the next section that's still open, you're gonna be skipping down a ways. Yeah, you're probably
50
page 50. Yeah.
Where are you?
tinted windows.
Yes, window tinting. And I think this is something you can close quickly. There are a couple minor tweaks in it. And that is just bringing us up to the 70% language, and then it can be closed out. So
So we're on 48.
You're actually on page 50.
Okay,
So this is the language that we would be adding to replace last year's language, which referenced the Code of Federal Regulations. This would say if the object is shading or tinting material in the visible light transmission is not less than 70%. So that is, so that's an exception to the restriction on material that cuts down light transmission on a window.
go ahead.
So all the other language from last year remained, which required public outreach, and I think it starts in July.
Yep, so that is down on page 51. We get to last year's legislative intent language, and then on 52 in section 41, there is the rulemaking in subsection A, page 52. And then subsection B is the public outreach campaign. And 2 months prior to the effective date of section 39, which is July 1, 26. So this is by May 1, 26. You have to have the outreach campaign in place. And that gives 2 months lead time on the window tinting rule taking effect.
So when is the winding rule?
July 1 of next year.
26.
Yeah,
So
so
they
that takes
still
time
have
for
time
rulemaking.
to do the rulemaking.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that what we had last year?
I think last year you had July 1, 25, but realistically at this point, if they start rulemaking now, they would not finish by July 1. So you could switch it to like January 1. To rulemaking from the date you file a rule,
9 months.
it's an 8-month time period. You can do it quicker. But it really depends. So typically it's 6 to 8 months. Sometimes I've seen them be as quick as 3, but that's rare. And I've seen them take as long as over a year with extensions from LCAR. So.
And so even though the law was that they get this in place by this year, they chose not to do it. And under the argument that they didn't understand the code, so that they didn't know really how to, they just didn't do the rulemaking in time for July 1st this year.
My understanding is that they have not filed a rule at this point. And so at this point, I can double check that while we're sitting here.
But no.
But I don't think they filed a rule.
Sure they haven't.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Which maybe is understandable since the code is difficult to figure out how to read on the amount of light transmittal that would be allowed. So.
yeah, and I do have a copy of the SAE standard for those of you who are interested.
Because I did hear that I think I sent you that like on page 51 or section 51, it did say 70%. So just in general, it's annoying, Mr. Chair, that we pass a law and then they say we're not doing it because we can't figure it out or something like that. And then we just automatically have to push it back a year just because they chose to not do it. So I'm just
I totally get your frustration and where you are. I think we're trying to
Sure.
make it clearer and move this along and be respectful to, but
yeah.
the work that was put into this last year.
I appreciate it, and so I'm okay with it. And I guess the only other thing I want to clarify, it's still on the books that it's not legal, so a ticket still could be written for it. It just wouldn't, just going to be another year until it shows up in the inspection process.
So the updates that say 70% is going to that won't take effect. But yeah, it currently says you can't have shading or tinting material.
That's like,
but it doesn't say.
like it has to be 100% transmittal now, according to law.
What the law's not clear, right?
And it just says you can't have.
Pun intended.
Right, it says you can't cover it with shading or.
So if even if the shading only blocked 1%, you could get a ticket technically.
Theoretically, yeah, and then you could argue about.
Right.
Okay,
I don't even
Yeah.
want that.
They do it.
All right,
So are you okay?
I'm okay,
We
yeah,
leave this
yeah.
in,
Yes.
and this draft is in, and we're gonna
Okay.
highlight this.
Yep.
good,
Okay,
Back.
next.
all right,
It's just
that may be it.
effective date.
Yeah, the effective dates, which that's a non-issue for you, that was,
Just tell them we.
yeah. That was really just updating the cross references for the
I
sections.
would just say to people that with all the concerns and the requests that we've had about the single license plate, we're gonna have to trim up a, the costs and the estimates within the T-bill and the budget when we get through all of this. So, that issue I expect will come up in the T-bill simply because we're gonna have to balance the books. And that might be one tool that we could use to do that. And the controversy around, the single license plate, clearly in this room, we can't sort out in 3 days. Today, and now we're down to pretty near 2 days. So, so it's not in this draft, to do that. And
But-
so, go ahead.
But Mr. Chair, I think the point was that they, DMV just could do it without us saying yay or nay. Like,
Currently,
wasn't that
it
their-
says 1 or 2 license plates as the commissioner may require. So,
I've been on this committee, both in the House and the Senate enough that, there are strong opinions about 1 or 2 license plates. And I would say to you, it's a high enough profile issue that if I was in the leadership of, DMV, I would want to be very careful about unilaterally, making that decision without including legislature. We just heard a scolding of them about tinted, windshields. And we will want to say something about the handling of, a facility in Franklin County that they did that we felt didn't match, that we took up earlier in the year, that they went outside of the statute to fund that
Oh,
facility in
yeah.
Franklin County.
But that was.
So
Yeah.
there is a back and forth on all of this, but I would say to you, that's a high enough profile issue that I would doubt very much that the agency and that department would choose to go it alone without including legislators. And by having this conversation, I think we highlighted even more to them. And so as we get to the T-bill, to balance the T-bill, because we've got a number of issues here that are nicking away at our revenues. So we're gonna have to look it over. Okay, when we get Logan in the chair and we get some cost estimates, I think we can narrow the discussion and we'll get a side by side and we'll be taking this back up. I'm not sure if we can get there this morning, but definitely tomorrow.
okay, I will get the side by side to you and, to the extent that I can, I'll try to make updates while we're talking. I just don't know if I can get those through.
Yep.
Before you're done today.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your time.
I think. Yeah. Thank you.
So good morning. Thank you for all having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on S66. For the record, my name is Jordan Souter. I'm a policy advocate for the American Civil Liberties Union of Vermont. Just want to give a little background information about me. I'm originally from Virginia, where I got my degrees in criminal justice and philosophy of law. I moved up to Vermont and attended Vermont Law Graduate School, where I got my JD and focused my studies on restorative justice. Fell in love with Vermont, so I decided to stay here. Before coming to the ACLU, I was a restorative practices facilitator for the Orange County Restorative Justice Center.
Nice.
And this is full disclosure, my first time testifying, so I'm very excited to be here, and please be gentle with me.
We will, and thank you.
Never.
Regarding S66, I'm here to share some concerns that we have about this bill. For context, we've been working on our Smarter Stops campaign for a few years now that aims to reduce traffic stops for non-public safety violations. Vermonters are already stopped at rates far higher than the national average. And these rates are worse for drivers of color who are disproportionately stopped at higher rates than white drivers. Especially for low-level equipment violations, such as a broken taillight or excessively loud muffler, and are also much more likely to be subjected to a search. This is especially concerning in the given moment we're in now, where law enforcement officers might potentially be looking for persons who might not be U.S. citizens. With increased federal pressure on states to support ICE detention and deportations, it's especially crucial to limit unnecessary interactions between law enforcement and Vermont motorists. So we maintain that police officers should limit traffic stops to violations that jeopardize public safety, not non-safety equipment violations, such as violations added in this bill. So for clarity, we appreciate the reasoning behind this bill. It provides clarity on what is able to pass inspection for inspection agencies, as well as for law enforcement officers as to what exactly constitutes the violation. However, our concerns lie in how it could be enforced against Vermont motorists, particularly Vermont motorists of color. However, our proposal has been to make these non-public safety violations secondarily enforced, similarly to how we enforce Vermont's seatbelt violations. We do not have any concerns regarding the provisions about the ability to pass inspection. We're generally supportive of that. But we did just want to highlight some specific concerns we had on Section 2 and Section 5 of this bill. For Section 2, regarding the measurement of sound level, we see by asking law enforcement to carry new equipment, it increases the likelihood that we'll see more traffic stops for equipment violations, which is something that we hope to see us moving away from. And for Section 5, we do have concerns about the implications of a citizen reporting system that may or may not be necessary, and how it could be used as a form of harassment or target people for discriminatory purposes such as race or perceived immigration status. But those are general concerns. That is my testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much. I'm a very passionate supporter of the ACLU, so I was sad to see that you came out in part against the bill. So just want to put that out there because I do think that just like speeding, just like other public health situations, it affects communities who are disadvantaged far more than it does communities who are wealthy. And that's what I've experienced with constituents who have had just repeat, consistent noise affecting their lives, and it disproportionately affects low-income communities, and they have the least tools to actually respond to that situation. So while I respect your positioning around reducing the stops, I think it's unfortunate because it comes on the backs of a group of people who have almost no tools in their toolbox to actually reduce noise, which lowers their property values, impacts their health. We heard a lot of really compelling testimony about cortisol levels and increased stress. And if you follow public health as it relates to people of color, that is a clear connection to earlier death rates amongst people of color is high cortisol. So there's a lot of information about that. So I think you're kind of a little cutting your nose to spite your face in some ways by advocating against this bill. But I did have just one question. Which was you mentioned that you would be in favor of the inspection work rather than having folks be stopped at roadside. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on that and why that's a better and more effective tool.
So, kind of going back to what I was saying previously is that our concerns with the bill aren't necessarily with the bill itself. We understand, like I said, the reasonings behind the bill and supportive of the reasons behind it. However, it is our concern is the enforcement aspect. And so while, we want our roads to be safer, we want our roads, we don't want, excessive noise to be, polluting our communities. But in, the concern with the increased rates of traffic stops, given sort of the political climate that we're in now, and with how we see traffic stops disproportionately impacting communities of color, it is reducing the number of traffic stops that is our primary concern. And that's why, we're supportive of things such as the inspection aspect of this bill, and would also be supportive of having these equipment violations be secondarily enforced. But as for the bill itself, like we absolutely understand and that it has that it comes from a place of trying to improve the lives of communities who, especially low-income communities, who would be negatively impacted by these. But we do see a troubling trend with the number of traffic stops that we already have, with Vermont traffic stops rates being nearly 3 times the national average. And we just see that as the way it would be enforced now, and it would be another violation that law enforcement could use to as a pretextual stop potentially.
Yeah, actually a question on that.
Go ahead.
I guess I want to compare the way that we would be enforcing this to how we enforce speeding. So right now there is a very clear standard of if you are breaking the speed limit, and that's you get clocked and, oh, you're going 75 and a 65. Do you find that those stops are happening disproportionately to folks who are people of color? Or is what you're referring to is like the more discretionary, there's no standard stops? Because what I see is we put in place within the bill a very clear standard, where if you're violating that standard, just like speeding, you get, it's not a discretionary. Is that tail light out? Is there dice hanging that I saw from the dash? It's boom, I have a decibel reader and I know that this person is louder than what we allow. So I'm wondering if you could compare for me, do you see this like speeding where there is a very clear standard of that person is going 75? Do we still see a higher rate of stops for people of color in those situations, with also having a clear standard for noise where we know, boom, you're over the limit?
So specifically in terms of the rates of stops of people for speeding, I don't have those numbers on me, but where the difference that I would see is like for speeding, which would be, primarily enforced as well as like that would be considered a public safety
Yeah.
violation. But our concern is for like these equipment violations that don't pose an immediate threat to public safety.
So it's like the first section, section 2 would like the straight pipes and the gutted mufflers. You feel that those kinds of equipment-based violations are the problem, not the standard that's being set for the decibel levels.
Right. In terms of, the problem being the use of low-level equipment violations as a reason for initial stops. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It would be helpful. It's a little distressing to hear that we stop more people
Yeah,
here than other places. If you have any data around that,
Yes.
that it would be helpful for you to submit that to the committee.
Absolutely.
And put that, because that is a little distressing.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to send it over.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Now it's done.
and thank you for your restorative justice.
If we could take maybe a 10-minute break, and we'll be back.